Hello and good evening, everybody, and it's really great to be here tonight. And tonight I will be presenting to you episode 53 of Album Rant. And as promised last week, I am going to return to the world of Budgie. Yes, Welsh heavy metal rock band formed in the late 60s, early 70s. And I just gotta say this straight up, right off the bat, it is a crime that these guys are not more widely recognized because they have had some very, very killer records throughout their history. And of those killer records, I'm going to be looking at their fourth one, entitled In for the Kill, released in 1974. I think that's right. If I'm wrong, too late. But I've talked about these guys before. One of my previous episodes of Album Rant, I did cover their third album, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend. So I just want to keep moving chronologically. So now I'm going to talk about their fourth album, In for the Kill. But y'all know the story of how these guys came to be. Formed in the late 60s, 1967. And they were originally composed of Burke Shelley on bass guitar and lead vocals, Tony Bourge, I want to say, on lead guitar, and Ray Phillips on the drums. So yes, they have a very, very similar arrangement to Rush. And I'm going to talk about kind of who they remind me of later on throughout this video. But you're probably wondering, how did they get the name Budgie? It's very odd. It's quite weird. Well, essentially from what I've read, they wanted to pick a name for the band that sounded completely different from the type of music that they were going to produce. They were going to produce hard rock and heavy metal, and they just wanted something completely out in left field. So take that for what you will. But they finally released their very first debut album in 1971. And this thing was definitely coming off the heels of Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, and to a much, much, much lesser extent, Uriah Heep. But that very first debut album was produced by Roger Bain, who is most well known for his work with Black Sabbath, the aforementioned Black Sabbath. And I thought it was really, really awesome. It included songs such as Guts, Nude Disintegrating Parachutist Woman. Yes, that is the name of a song. They have some very odd titles, but I'm totally fine with it. We have Rape of the Locks and Homicidal Suicidal. And so, yeah, they had a very, very definite mesh of heavy metal, prog rock, and blues rock. And it just totally worked. It totally came together. And I really respect that first album. I also really respect their second album, entitled Squawk, released in 1972. And it continued on along the same sound that was established in the debut record. And we had songs such as Whiskey River, Hot as a Doctor's Armpit, and Stranded. And I like that one just as much as the debut. But then we come to what many consider to be their best album. I'm not fully sure if I agree with that. And speaking of that, one of these days, someday in the future, at some point, I might do a Budgie album ranking video, but not tonight. But they did release their third album, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend, in 1973. And I'm not going to talk too much about that one because, well, I've already reviewed it. But, you know, again, just some of the highlights from that album. We had Bread Fan, You're the Biggest Thing Since Powdered Milk. Man, I love that song. In the Grip of a Tire Fitter's Hand, and of course, the epic, bluesy, proggy, hard rock, heavy metal, magnum opus, Parents. I love that song. But then, after that, we finally arrive at what I'm going to be focusing my discussion on tonight, and that being their fourth album, In for the Kill. And you can see what we have there on the cover. I mean, it's nothing really to write home about, but it's creative, I'll give them that. So looking over here on the back, we have the lineup right there. We have Burke Shelley, who again is on a bass guitar and lead vocals. We have Tony Bourge on lead guitar, and then we have Pete Boot on the drums. This would be, I believe, the only album with Pete Boot on the drums. He replaced Ray Phillips on this one, and I believe he was replaced by Steve Williams on their following effort, Bandolier, after this one. So, this is an important piece of Budgie history in the sense that this is the only time we get to hear the drumming from Pete Boot. So take that for what you will. But here is the track list, and there are only 7 tracks on this, but they really make everyone count. I'm going to say that. A lot of these are very extended pieces. They'll run 8-9 minutes or so. So it's very logical there would be less songs on here to account for the very, very long and epic lengths to it. But anyways, it starts off with the title track, In for the Kill. And this one sets the stage very, very nicely. Starts off with a very thunderous, heavy guitar riff at the beginning. And then, of course, the band starts kicking in and everybody comes in and it just starts rocking right from the very beginning. These guys, like I said, they have a very similar band structure to Rush, who was one of the greatest prog rock bands in history. Well, they also have a very similar sound to Rush in the sense that that bass is so incredibly apparent. The guitar, of course, takes center stage, but the bass, man, it accompanies the guitar so incredibly well. And Burke Shelley has a very, very similar voice to Geddy Lee. But the thing is this, these guys actually predate Rush, so I don't know if they were an influence on them. I can't imagine that they weren't, but I've never actually received any official confirmation on that. But yes, we have a very, very heavy guitar riff at the beginning, and the bass is, man, it just accompanies things so very well, very, very Rush-like. But it's pretty fast. It starts off with a very, very grooving rhythm, and the chorus, I think, works very, very well. I mean, the rhythm, as I said, is very unique. Loving, knowing, giving, showing, love is seeing and ever being. Motor cruising, midnight boozing, after singing in bells that are ringing. Wow, I have no idea what that means, but it is there at least. The thing is this, after about 2 minutes or so, the rhythm kind of changes a bit. It gets a lot faster, but it gets a little bit slower, but at the same time, it does get a little bit heavier. So it's a pretty decent trade-off, and so the interlude has a very, very different sound and rhythm to the first two verse-chorus arrangements. But again, it does get a little bit heavier, and then towards the end, it goes back to that original riff, and it starts getting fast once again. Again, the production is absolutely top-notch. The production is awesome, and the sound is great, and I really, really do love the title track. Then we come to Crash Course in Brain Surgery, and this was actually not written for the In for the Kill album. It was actually released as a single back in 1971, around the same time as the debut album, and so it has a very, very different feel from the rest of the album. That's not a bad thing, I'm just saying it is. Why it ended up on this album instead of just being its own separate little thing, I don't know, but it's here, we get to hear it, and at least there's that. But it starts off with a nice little bass intro, and then things start kicking in. It's got a very different vibe from the title track. It's got a very stonery feel to it, if that makes sense. Like, it definitely sounds like a bunch of beach bums out on the beach after surfing, and they're getting high, and it's Again, a very, very different feel. I don't think this is really quite their heaviest song, and it's never really been a favorite of mine, but it does exist, and we got to hear it, so there's that at least. And it's very short. It's only about 2 minutes and change or so it's not like it takes up a big chunk of this record. But at the same time, it is a very, very important moment in the band's history. Then we come to Wondering What Everyone Knows. And this is actually a very apparent trend on a lot of Budgie albums, in the sense they often have these very haunting, very, very gloomy acoustical ballads. And again, it's not, when I say ballad, I don't mean like a very sappy love song. I just mean a very, very soft song. And it is soft, but again, that dark atmosphere is very, very apparent. It doesn't sound like a typical acoustic ballad. But again, it sounds like a very heavy band, a very dark band, trying to vary up their approach a little bit and try something different, and I really respect that. But then we come to the 4th track of the album and the 4th track on side 1, Zoom Club. I'm going to say this right now. There are not enough people in this world who appreciate Zoom Club. This thing is an absolute beast, okay? This is the big centerpiece of the album. This is definitely one of the strongest Budgie tracks they have ever recorded. Nice guitar intro once again, and then after about a minute or so, the band starts coming in. We have this very bluesy feeling to it, and it's almost jazzy in a sense. Maybe I shouldn't go that far, but it definitely has some very, very bluesy influences to it, which I love. But again, the whole thing just feels like it's building up and building up. And man, the jam to this thing is just incredible. I probably did that incorrectly, but it's all right. But again, like I said, things just feel like they're building up and picking up, and it does this throughout the entirety of the 9+ minutes. What I find very, very fascinating and very, very noteworthy about Zoom Club is this is definitely an extended piece. This is definitely a prog-rock jam session, but it doesn't feel like 9 minutes. It goes by so quickly because you are so hooked into it. Zoom Club is awesome. Side 1 is awesome. But my favorite from side 1 is most definitely Zoom Club. And I'm going to stand by that, and that's really saying something because side 1 has some definite classics on there. So now let's go ahead and see what we have on side number 2. It starts off with Hammer and Tongs, and it's got a very, very dark fade into it. It's kind of like the guitar starts coming in for a bit, then fades out for a bit, then comes in for a bit, and fades out for a bit. And I was taking some notes earlier, and I noticed it sounds very reminiscent of the intro to Damage Incorporated by Metallica. And that's actually quite fitting considering Metallica has cited these guys as a very definite influence. But after, once again, the band starts coming in, it really starts to get a lot heavy, but it's also very, very bluesy. But it's not upbeat, it's definite dark and bluesy. And it's 6 minutes and 53 seconds, and it doesn't really let up at all, which I definitely really, really love. But even parts of it sound Led Zeppelin-y. Led Zeppelin-y. Yes, that's the word I'm going to go with. Led Zeppelin-y. In the sense that, once again, it sounds a lot like Dazed and Confused. And there's a whole lot of moments where Burke is just going, "Woman!" And like I said, that definite blues influence is very, very apparent on Hammer and Tongs. Now, at the end of each rhythm section, I guess we could call that, it gets a little bit heavy. It starts picking up a bit, and then it just sort of falls back for a bit and relaxes back into the groove, and the like I said, the rhythm works very, very well. There's, in the middle, we have in the interlude, there's kind of a dark section. It's kind of murky, but again, once again, it comes back and it finishes off very, very nicely. So that is Hammer and Tongs. Then we have Running From My Soul, which is the most straightforward song off of side number 2 that I'll say, and actually it might be the most straightforward song off this entire album. Maybe not. But again, this one is only about 2 minutes and change or so, and it has a very, very rock and roll vibe to it, almost kind of a boogie feel to it. It's very reminiscent, in my opinion, of maybe 50s rock and rolls, and so, again, these guys keep doing something different on every single track, and gotta respect that, but Running From My Soul is definitely, like I said, a very short, straightforward rocker, and, I dig it. But then we come to Living On Your Own, which is the album closer. And this thing is just a little bit shy of 9 minutes, about 8 minutes, 56 seconds or so. And it starts off at a medium pace. Okay, so it's not very fast, not very slow, and it still, once again, has some very bluesy feels to it, okay? But unlike maybe songs like Hammer and Tongs or Wondering What Everyone Knows, this one feels a little bit more upbeat to it, which I do like. But we go through 2 verse-chorus arrangements, and then all of a sudden, the band just stops. And Tony Bourge comes in with a very, very heavy guitar lick, which I love. And then after that, the song kind of stops for a bit. It becomes very, very mellow and very chill for a bit. But then, as you probably guessed, which is a recurring theme, the band comes back and we get a very, very amazing jam session. It almost sounds like Child in Time by Deep Purple in a sense. And it goes dun 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 dun, and I love it. It's such a great jam session, and it goes on for quite a bit. And so you just really have a chance to kind of lose yourself in the music and just enjoy it. But then once again, it comes back to the original rhythm one more time. We have one more verse-chorus arrangement. And then the entire thing crescendos into a big, epic conclusion. And the album goes out on a high note. And for that, I really do love In For The Kill. And my favorite from side 2 is probably going to be Living On Your Own. But having said all that, Zoom Club is definitely the best song on here. In fact, side 1 is definitely stronger than side 2, but both sides are very, very good. And do I recommend this album? You bet I do. In fact, I recommend the majority of Budgie's discography. Definitely their first 5 albums, Bandolier being the other one that came after this, but really, you've got to hear these guys, because as I said, they are a mesh of Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, and Rush, and it works so incredibly well, and these guys really have not gotten the appreciation that they so rightfully deserve. But that is going to conclude my album rant episode of In For The Kill. Anyways, thank you all for joining me here this evening. Next time, I want to talk about a red rocker. But until then, have a very pleasant evening.